In this little video, I'm going to talk about the concept of regret. So many people have great regrets after a person dies, a wife, a husband, partner, or even someone else in the family. So I want to talk about this concept of regret and how we can perhaps live with it. Before I do that, there is a little subscribe button below me. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel, as it gives me really good feedback as to who is watching and what people like in these videos. And then when you've clicked subscribe, there'll be a little bell icon that appears. Just tap on that as well and you'll be notified when these videos go live. So let's get into this subject of regret. And I want to talk about it and draw a comparison to learning a new skill. So if you think about a time when you learnt to do something for the first time, perhaps something you started to learn years and years ago, and now you've got quite good at it. So it could be anything. 7 years ago, I started to learn to dance, and now I'm okay. I'm all right. Modern dancing, modern jive. 30 years ago, I started to learn to be a dental technician. And after 25 years of doing that, or 20 years or whatever it was of doing that, I became quite good at being a dental technician. So we've got the beginning when we start to learn to do something, and we've got kind of now, or perhaps a few years ago, when we can look back on that journey. And this is what we do with regret. Now, we wouldn't look at that skill now and say, all those years ago, 7 years ago when I started to learn to dance, 35, might even be 40 years ago when I started to learn to be a dental technician, I wouldn't look back at that time and criticize myself and say, oh, you were such an idiot. When you went to dance classes, you couldn't dance at all. It's easy to dance. Look, I can do it really easily. Or when I was a dental technician, to look back on that year, those years when I was 19 years old, when I started to learn to be a dental technician, I don't look back on myself and criticize myself to say, well, why couldn't you do it when you first started? We don't do that, do we? We're kind to ourselves, and we recognize that when we start to do something years ago in the past, we don't have the resources to be able to do that thing. We don't have the resources of hand-eye coordination, of listening to the music if it's dancing, of coordinating our body. We don't have the correct resources. Yet, when we look back, it's easy to say, to identify, yes, now I have the resources to do those things, and I can look back on the past and I could criticize myself. But we don't do that with a skill. But this is what we do with regret. When we live in the moment, which we do every single day, sometimes we can do things, sometimes we can't do things. And we can do things now because we've got the resources available. The things that we can't do now, it's because we don't have the resources available. And all regret is getting into the future with additional resources and looking back on the past and criticizing ourselves for not having the resources. But if we had the resources in the past, we would have acted differently. And I think that's a really useful way of thinking about regret and saying, well, actually, I did what I did in the past because I had the resources available to me at the time. And now I might have a different set of resources, a different set of skills. And I might look back on the past and say, well, if I still had this same set of resources back in the past, I might have acted differently. But I didn't. I did the best that I could at the time with the resources that were available to me. And now I can look back on that person and say, do you know what, Mark? At the time, you did the best that you could with the resources you had available. And the same principle is now thinking about the future. There will be things that we all do right now, and we do the best we can with the resources we have available, with the skills, with the resources, with the things that are around us. And in the future, we might have additional resources, which we could say, well, if I'd had them now, I would have done things differently. Well, of course we would, but we don't have them now. It's the benefit of hindsight from that future position. So just be kind to yourself. You will always do the best you can with the resources you have available to you. And in the future, you may have additional resources, which might mean that you can look back to that time in the past and say, do you know what? Had I have had those other resources, I would have acted differently. But you didn't have them. And so you couldn't act differently. I do hope that helps thinking a little bit about regret and to be kind to yourself for what you did in the past and comparing to how you are now.